All right, for more than 50 years, Brooks has celebrated the spoken word through the Wilder Speaking Prize. Established in 1966 by Todd Kobe, who was part of the class of 1961, and his brother John Kobe in the class of 62. It's an all-school oratory competition that honors former schoolmaster F. Fessenden Wilder. Students are required to recite a memorized speech and then deliver their own longer original speech. The latter speeches have, in the past couple of years, ranged from serious to humorous, but they've always involved a personal tale, and often they reflect on a moment when students have learned something about themselves or our community. In that way, the speeches offer a glimpse into a moment of personal growth and maturity for those that are brave enough to stand in front of the entire school and speak about themselves. We're going to hear tonight from our own students as they speak the words of some very well-known and great writers, and then we'll hear from them in their own voice, some of their own thoughts as they respond. In terms of the way the competition's set up, there are 2 rounds. In the first round, there's a memorized piece from a famous or historical text or speech that they'll be reciting, and again, those won't obviously be their own words. And in the second round, there'll be an original piece where they react to a quote from Maya Angelou. There's 4 judges sitting up front that are going to be focused on both content and delivery. Ms. Sean Yell, Mr. Baker, Ms. Perkins, and Mr. Waters will all be judging. And our student body will have a voice. Later on tonight, after the speeches are over, there'll be a survey sent out where each of you will get a chance to give some feedback on yourself. That'll close around midnight tonight, so make sure you get your vote in. Only 1 vote per person. The winner will be announced later on this week. So without any further ado, we hope you get to sit back and relax and enjoy this, and we'll welcome up our first speaker, Kennedy Pounds.
I'll be doing an excerpt from Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may tread me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head, lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping in wide. Welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Claire Naughton, who will be delivering a passage from William Faulkner's Nobel Prize acceptance speech from 1950.
Our tragedy today is a general and universal physical fear, so long sustained by now that we can even bear it. There are no longer problems of the spirit. There is only the question, when will I be blown up? Because of this, the young men or woman writing today has forgotten the problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, which alone can make good writing, because only that is worth writing about, worth the agony and the sweat. He must learn them again. He must teach himself that the basest of all things is to be afraid. And teaching himself that, forget it forever, leaving no room in his workshop for anything but the old verities and truths of the heart. The universal truths lacking which, in any story, is ephemeral and doomed. Love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice. Until he does so, he labors under a curse, writing not of love, but of lust, of defeats in which no one loses anything of value, of victories without hope, and worst of all, without pity or compassion. His griefs grieve on no universal bones, writing not of love, not the heart or the glands. Until he learns these things, he will write as though he stood among and watched the end of man. I decline to accept the end of man. It is easy enough to say that man is immortal, simply because he will endure. That when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded, from the last worthless rock hanging tideless, in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will still be one more sound, that of his puny and inexhaustible voice, still talking. I refuse to accept this. I believe that man is immortal. I believe that he will not merely endure, he will prevail. The poet's, the writer's duty is to write of these things. By reminding him of courage and by lifting him up, by lifting him up and enduring by lifting his heart. He writes not of courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice, which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man. It can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail.
Our next speaker will be Ratika Komaretti, who will be delivering an excerpt from Woman in the New Race by Margaret Sanger, written in 1920.
Women are too much inclined to follow in the footsteps of men, to try to think as men think, to try to solve the general problems of life as men solve them. If after attaining their freedom, women accept conditions in the spheres of government, industry, arts, morals, and religion as they find them, they will be but taking a leaf out of man's book. The woman is not needed to do man's work. She is not needed to think man's thoughts. She need not fear that the masculine mind, universally dominant, will fail to take care of her own. Her mission is not to enhance the masculine spirit, but to express the feminine. Hers is not to presume a man-made world, but to create a human world by the infusion of the female element into all of its activities. Women must not accept. She must challenge. She must not be awed by that which has been built up around her. She must reverence that within her which struggles for expression. Her eyes must be less upon what is and more clearly upon what should be. When she chooses her new, free course of action, it must be in the light of her own opinion, her own intuition. Thank you.
Next up, Aidan Shea will deliver a passage from President Obama's acceptance speech from 2008.
This election had many firsts and many stories that will be told for generations. But one that's on my mind tonight is about a woman who cast her ballot in Atlanta. She's a lot like the millions of others who stood in line to make their voices heard, except for one thing. Ann Nixon Cooper is 106 years old. She was born just a generation past slavery, a time where there were no cars on the roads or planes in the sky, when someone like her couldn't vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because of the color of her skin. And tonight, I think about all that she's seen throughout her century in America: the heartache and the hope, the struggles and the progress, the times that we were told we can't, and the people who pressed on with that American creed. Yes, we can. At a time when women's voices were silenced and their hopes dismissed, she lived to see them stand up and speak out and reach for that ballot. Yes, we can. When there was despair in the Dust Bowl and depression across the land, she saw a nation conquer fear itself with a new deal, new jobs, and a new sense of common purpose. Yes, we can. When the bombs fell on our harbor and tyranny threatened the world, she was there to witness a generation rise to greatness and a democracy was saved. Yes, we can. She was there for the buses in Montgomery, the hoses in Birmingham, a bridge in Selma, and a preacher from Atlanta who told the people that we shall overcome. Yes, we can. A man touched down on the moon. A wall came down in Berlin. A world was connected by our own science and imagination. And this year, in this election, she touched her finger to a screen and cast her vote. Because after 106 years in America, through the best of times and the darkest of hours, she knows how America can change. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Please welcome the final speaker in this round, Ken Zabuanen, who will be delivering an excerpt from Woman in the New Race by Margaret Sanger.
Women are too much inclined to try to follow in the footsteps of men, to try to think as men think, to try to solve the general problems of life as men would solve them. If after attaining their freedom, women accept the conditions in the spheres of government, industry, art, moral, and religion as they find them, they will be but taking a leaf out of a man's book. The woman is not needed to do a man's work. She is not needed to think man's thoughts. She need not fear that masculine mind, universally dominant, will fail to take care of her own. Her mission is not to enhance the masculine spirit, but to express the feminine. Her job is not to presume a man-made world, but to create a human world by the infusion of feminine element into all of its activities. Women must not accept. She must challenge. She must not be awed by that which has been built up around her. She must reverence that which struggles for expression. Her eyes must be less upon what is and more clearly upon what could be. When she chooses her new free course of action, it must be in the light of her own opinion and her own intuition. Thank you.
In the second round, our speakers will be reacting to a quote from the late Maya Angelou, an American author, poet, storyteller, activist, and dancer who passed away a year ago this month. The quote is as follows: "Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently." With their reactions, please once again welcome our speakers. First up, Kennedy Pounds.
Mark Twain once said, Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. From my perspective, courage is also the ability to do something that you wouldn't normally do, despite the risks of judgment or fear of not being accepted. I see courage displayed every day in the Brooks community. Whether it's a freshman saying hi to a senior on Main Street, a senior giving a senior speech in chapel, or someone giving an announcement in school meeting. But when I think of the word courage, my mom is the person who comes to mind. My mom is a strong Black woman, and given the obstacles she works to overcome, I see having courage as part of her job description. Being a mother of 5 and a civil rights lawyer, she has always pushed me and motivated me to do my best and to get outside of my comfort zone. Growing up in the heart of Los Angeles during the start of the war on drugs in the early 1980s, my mom had to work hard for everything she has gained. Constantly surrounded by hopelessness and decay, she was determined to make it out of the streets and into a better life, which is exactly what she was able to do. While in 8th grade, a few of my mom's teachers noticed that she always went above and beyond what was expected, so she was given a chance to take the SSATs to go to boarding school. My mom had never even heard of boarding school. The word wasn't even in her vocabulary. She didn't want to be away from her family, but at the same time, she wanted to experience something new and exciting. When it was time to identify schools that she wanted to attend, she circled them at random on the SSAT form, not knowing any background information about any of the schools. Brooks just happened to be one of the schools that she circled. A few months after her application, having forgotten she even applied, she received her acceptance letter. She was shocked because she had no idea if any of the schools would even want her as a student. In the fall of 1990, my mom experienced being one of just a small number of people of color who attended Brooks School. It was a tough transition for her to make, but she still did not lose sight of who she was as a person. During school meetings, she would prepare rap music to deliver her announcements, and she would say fun poems to get the other kids excited. In what would seem a difficult transition for her from the inner city of Los Angeles to an elite boarding school, my mom found a way to be herself. She added to the diversity of the school by exposing other kids to her culture and life experiences. She was not afraid to stand up for what she believed in, which was social justice and equality. Throughout her time at Brooks, my mom entered many speaking and writing contests for the fun of it. For one of the chapel services during her 5th form year, my mom wrote and recited a poem about racial justice in front of the entire school. Her poem was so moving that she wound up being invited to Washington, D.C. to say her poem at a national conference. During her senior year, my mom was elected co-head senior prefect and was tasked with the honor of leading the student body. All of my mom's experiences and memories at Brooks have helped her become the person that she is today. Brooks helped her become a better leader and a mentor to those still struggling to find themselves and their place in society. If it weren't for Brooks and the students and teachers that encouraged her to be her best, she might not have accomplished her dream of becoming a lawyer and a civil rights activist. Over the years, my mom has won many awards for the work that she does, and recently traveled to Ferguson, Missouri as a legal observer for the National Lawyers Guild. During her first night in Ferguson, she was actually tear-gassed by police as she stood near protesters, being unable to see or breathe well for about 15 minutes. She witnessed people being arrested and dragged into the police stations during protests. Those experiences had a major impact on my mom and influenced her to become a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Through Black Lives Matter, my mom has been involved in demonstrating and marching on major highways to raise awareness about police shootings of unarmed African Americans. Even though my mom is a law professor and civil rights lawyer, she still joins in on protests because she has never forgotten where she came from, and she feels she has a duty to stand up for what is right. My mom's determination and resolve to fight for justice makes me proud to be her daughter. I have listened to enough of her speeches and sermons to know that with hard work, a spirit of determination, and courage, anything is possible. Whether it's putting someone else's life above your own, forgiving those who caused you harm, failing miserably at a Room X performance, or even dancing to Gas Pedal in front of the whole school, Courage can come in many forms. I have learned that it is with the support of one's friends, family, and the Brooks School community that a person will be able to overcome difficult situations. Maya Angelou once said, "Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." I couldn't agree more. If you really believe in something, then you must be willing to step outside of your comfort zone and reach for your goals no matter what. After all, YOLO. You only live once. And what life is worth living without the courage to reach for your goals? Thank you.
Please welcome our next speaker with her reaction to Maya Angelou's quote, Claire Naughton.
Having courage is to play the final game, to row the longest race, and to stand on stage and act out something that everyone in the audience fears, or something that I haven't experienced yet, like standing up in front of your peers and talking about hitting rock bottom or telling us about your reign. Having courage is to stand up and do something that frightens you, to have strength in a place of pain, to stare an illness or an obstacle right in the face and leap at it like an animal. I agree with Maya Angelou's assertion that courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. Fear stops us from consistently practicing virtues. Fear is what ails you, and courage is the cure. So what are the things that we fear? How do you face these things? At 12 years old, my sister and I were left in an orphanage in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand. No, our parents did not abandon us. It was for a service project that my sister was doing. I was with children who didn't speak my language and some who couldn't even speak. I was taught some sign language to say my name and where I was from, but I found that it wasn't enough. While I was there, I met a little girl named New Year. She was named this because she was found on New Year's Eve that year. I was surprised when she unsteadily walked up to me and held her arms out as if she wanted me to pick her up, because I was about a foot taller than her, and her arm was about half the size of mine. I hesitated, and then picked her up. I propped her on my hip and looked at her. She studied my face and touched my hair. Then she smiled, and laid her head on my shoulder. While I was there, New Year's introduced me to her brother. When we met, he smiled at me, and I smiled back. That became our own secret language. From then on, we just smiled. The first time I saw New Year's brother frown was when it was time for me to go. Before I left, I hugged him and spoke the first words I had ever said to him. Goodbye. I learned from New Year and her brother that you have to have the courage to actively show love. It can be scary to love someone or to let them love you, but it is a virtue that you need to have courage to keep in your life. I have been scared many times in my life, but I have rarely stood up and had the courage to confront it. The few times that I have been faced with this challenge, it has been with a large amount of support. For example, just this year, my coaches and my teammates for basketball encouraged me when I had none. They told me that I could make the shot to tie the game with 3 seconds left during the timeout. And it shouldn't have taken that much courage to make such an easy shot, but I was scared. If it weren't for them calming my nerves, I may not have made the shot. The only thing stopping me from making that shot was fear, and 2 giant girls sprinting at me. but mostly fear. The thing that I needed was courage. It may have taken a push, but in the end, I got the courage I needed. A main fear is the fear of the unknown, and we need courage to keep moving in the dark. It is scary to think that even when you set yourself up for success, there is still the possibility of failing in the future, and there is no way of knowing it. What I see around Brooks is people consistently setting themselves up for success and having the courage to try new things, even if there's a possibility to fail in the future. I admire that and hope that someday I will have the courage to overcome the fear of the future. But the truth is, I have not experienced enough in my life to be put in a situation where it asked more than just a basket or speaking in front of an audience, like so. I know some people who have had to show great amount of courage. My mom, for example. She was diagnosed with breast cancer at the beginning of my school year here at Brooks. It took courage for her and my dad to tell my sister and I this news. I remember when my family and I moved from Singapore to Finland, my mom kept saying, "We're in Finland," as if she couldn't believe this reality. I feel as if we all felt this way when she told us, except it was more morbid, and instead of, "We're in a cool new place," it was, "You have cancer." But that was just the beginning of her courageous journey, and my dad's alongside hers. It takes courage to accept your reality, because sometimes you're scared of your reality and what has become of it. My mom faced the ultimate fear, death. She had courage to accept, to fight, and then to climb up the steep and treacherous mountain that is cancer. She not only endured, but also prevailed and persevered. That is why we can still hear her voice today. Courage is the gateway to a virtuous life. Live every day courageously, and you will have no regrets. Because of courage, I am capable of having love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice in my life. Thank you.
Please welcome Ratika Komareddy.
Maya Angelou once said, "Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." Maya Angelou raises a very interesting point with this quote. According to her, courage means that we have the ability to be honest, patient, loyal, or cooperative all the time. Day in and day out, practicing virtues all the time requires courage. In this day and age, having courage and being stubborn are separated by an incredibly, almost non-existent fine line. If you're courageous, you'll overcome an obstacle no matter what, even if others aren't on your side. Being stubborn is doing the same thing over and over until you're right or you've won, whatever comes first. Our parents always tell us, "You're so stubborn," but we think, "No, I'm just right." Think of the circumstances in which our parents say that we're stubborn. Is it when we refuse to do something or insist that we're right in an argument? Merriam-Webster's definition of the word stubborn is unreasonably or perversely unyielding or unwavering. Being stubborn is saying, "No, I'm right. No, 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 no. No matter what you say, I am right." Let's look at courage. Maya Angelou says that having courage means that we can practice any and all virtues consistently. I have to say that I disagree. Yes, we need courage to be honest, as we've heard many times when it comes to being a bystander to bullying. We need courage to be loyal, both to friends and to ourselves, because being loyal is standing for what we believe in. However, in my opinion, courage is just stubbornness plus a virtue, giving it the positive connotation that we see and hear every day. The official definition of courage is mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Strength is such an appropriate word to have in that definition. We need the strength to complete a task or to face an obstacle. We need some sort of fire inside of us telling us, I am strong, I am brave, I can do this. Jane Austen described this relationship between courage and stubbornness best in her book, Pride and Prejudice, when she writes, "There is a stubbornness about me that can never bear to be frightened at the will of others. My courage always rises at every attempt to intimidate me." In many ways, what I'm saying reminds me of the speech I gave earlier about women and their rights. It takes an immense amount of courage to do what women and girls are doing out there in the world just to get educated. Anti-feminists believe that women are stubborn, that we are just trying to get our way. Here is where the fine line of being stubborn and being courageous comes in. Women have obstacles that they need to get past in order to achieve full equality with men. Women don't just insist that they're right, even though there are mountains of evidence against them. The fact is that women do get a lesser pay than men, and we do have stereotypes that affect the way in which we live. We fight because we have a reason, not because we're looking for one. I admit, I am one of the most stubborn people that I've ever met. My parents have told me this, my friends have told me this, and it's evident. I hate being wrong, and I can and I will argue until I'm right. But I think I'm also courageous. I can conquer a fear, and I have. I got over that common fear of public speaking a few years ago, and look at me now. I've participated in the Wilder for 2 years now and have taken part in other public speaking events since. Let's look at Maya Angelou's quote one more time. "You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." I think that when we as humans have the strength to overcome our fears consistently, we've achieved courage. On the other hand, when we have the hard-headedness to practice the same virtue consistently, and when we expect a different result every time, that's when we've crossed the line into being stubborn. This is why I believe that Maya Angelou was in fact describing stubbornness when she said this quote, not courage. Courage is strength, not simply consistency. We as people need the strength to overcome our obstacles, and that strength will bring us even closer to attaining full courage, both now and in the future. Thank you.
Please welcome our next speaker, Aidan Shea.
What is courage? To some, it is a simple definition. To others, it is so much more. To me, courage cannot be put into words, for it is more than a definition, more than an action. It is part of who we are. However, we are not always aware that it exists. Courage is not discovered until we put ourselves in a position of great fear. Only then is it truly revealed. However, we must remember that everyone's position of fear is different. Depending on the person, every action requires a varying amount of courage. When we hear the word courage, we immediately associate it with great things. A soldier fighting for his or her country, someone standing up for what they believe in. We forget that sometimes courage is just having the ability to wake up in the morning and get out of bed. Some people need to summon all the courage they have just to get through a day. Everything we say and everything we do requires at least a little courage. Maya Angelou once said, "Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." When I first heard this statement, it made me think about all the instances where courage is required. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how right she was. Courage is indeed one of the ingredients in the recipe of success. Winston Churchill summed it up very well. He said, "Courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees all others." Without courage, we will always begin to doubt ourselves in times when it is time for action. Sometimes this doubt can cause even a second of hesitation, and this can hurt you. For example, in a football game, the players need to have trust in themselves. The quarterback hesitates even for a tenth of a second, could be the difference between the game-winning touchdown and a loss. An example of extreme courage that resonates with me is that of Kyle Carpenter. Carpenter was a Marine deployed in Afghanistan. In 2010, when in the middle of a firefight, a live grenade was thrown between him and his best friend. Without hesitation, Carpenter threw himself on top of a grenade and took the full blast to his chest and face. After 2.5 years of being in the hospital, he was finally released and is now a recipient of the Medal of Honor. He could have run and tried saving his life. However, he stayed and was willing to die for his friend. If this isn't courage, I don't know what is. Another man who has lived a courageous life is Nelson Mandela. Throughout his lifetime, he completed multiple courageous deeds. For me, his greatest act of courage did not come when he stood and fought up for what he believed in. I believe his greatest act of courage came after he was released from prison. Instead of seeking revenge on those who had imprisoned them, he forgave them for the bettering of the country. It takes courage to accept that sometimes, you might have your issues with them, but you need to forget about it for the greater good. Now, Carpenter and Mandela are both very different. However, you can't deny that they are both courageous. Carpenter's courage was more physical. He was not afraid of getting hurt or even dying. On the other hand, Mandela possessed a much more emotional form of courage. When you compare them physically, one is a president and one was a Marine. Now, there are over 7 billion people in this world, and despite all of the differences, we too all share courage. We just have to find it. We must step out of our comfort zone and integrate fear. General George Patton said, "Courage is fear holding on a minute longer." I urge you all that the next time you are in a position of great fear, to hold on a minute longer and see where it takes you. Thank you.
Our final speaker of the evening, Kenza Buana.
At this moment, there are 7,240,653,821 living, breathing people in the world. Some are running scared, some are chasing their dreams, some are mending, and some are coming home. Some are evil men at war with good, and some are good, dealing with their own demons. We are all coping with our triumphs and trenches. 7 billion people, 7 billion souls. And we all need one thing. We all need the fire and the passion inside of us to continue doing what we love every single day. The drive to succeed and the motivation to ignite and set fire to our largest aspirations. That voice, that fire, that energy, that's courage. Maya Angelou once said, "Courage is the most important of all virtues. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." Courage is defined by the ability to do something that frightens one. So I ask, what scares you? In the smallest sense and in the largest sense, what shakes you to the core at 3 a.m, so much so you can't catch your breath and nothing in the world seems right? Or what makes you restless during the day so much so you can't focus in class? Whether it's about college, family, relationships, academics, or personal battles, what calls for courage in your own mind? Think about that. We all have our own fears, so in the same respect, we all have our own kind of courage. For some, like Malala Yousafzai, her courage was continuing being a human rights activist even after she was shot in the head by the Taliban. For others, courage is as small as getting out of bed in the morning. And that's important to note. People deal with different things, and they grow from their things differently. Growing up, my parents used to say an Arabic proverb that sums it up well. It translates directly into, "We must not mock a pain we haven't endured or a courage we have never supplied." I hope that speaks to you. I want to talk about the uniqueness and personal level of courage I've witnessed in my own life and in others around me. Courage is everywhere. I see it in the young black boys in Baltimore fighting for their natural-born rights since 1968, despite the countless numbers of murders. What drives them? I saw it in Palwasha Barakzai, who came to the United States to receive an education in a language and culture that was foreign from her own. What drives her? I saw it in my mother, who was diagnosed with an early stage of breast cancer when I was 5 and my younger sister was only 2. Imagine the horror. Imagine how helpless she felt. She went into remission shortly after, but I cannot begin to fathom the strength it took to keep pushing and keep going. What drove her? I saw courage in the eyes of my uncle, who fell into a deep depression when his son, who was only 2, died from kidney cancer last year. He was only 2. My uncle said, "Why must I bury my baby so young? He has so much to see and so much to learn." My uncle still believes this, and I don't think he's ever fully recovered. I don't think it's something you ever fully recover from. In fact, his son's room is still decorated to this day with all his bedding and toys scattered around the room. He could have slowly began a downward spiral, but I witnessed him grow from absolutely nothing but hate and sorrow into a person of love, courage, empathy, and wisdom. Last summer, while we were in his son's room, I broke the silence. I asked, "How did you do it?" And I didn't explain myself any further, but he knew exactly what I meant. He sighed and he said, "Kenza, I learned that if you love life and find the courage to love it again, life will love you right back." I will carry those words forever. So what drove him? Courage. And what drives you? When we have nothing at all, when the world seems like our greatest enemy, we still have courage. And that is perhaps the greatest and most reassuring thing I know. At Brooks, the largest fault I've witnessed in my generation is when contemplating in the recesses of their own mind, that same place should be a sanctuary from the outside world. That place is riddled with fears and plagued by insecurities. People I know, people I look up to, my peers and adults alike, they convince themselves that their words have no value. They believe they cannot get up after they fall. They believe that a smile is not contagious and that a hello cannot brighten someone's day. They are sure that their words produced by welling emotion, empathy for a fragile soul or a broken heart, sympathy could not drastically alter the internal atmosphere of a stranger. They're certain they cannot change the world. They're certain they cannot change a person. They're wrong. And what they lack is courage to bounce back in the face of adversity. I've seen this in people, and I have seen it in myself, and it terrifies me to know that people are terrified. We still have to change the world, and we need the courage to do so. My point in all of this is that courage comes in many shapes and many sizes, and no matter what it is for you, use it. Don't let mistakes encapsulate you or fear hinder you. Don't focus on the negative, but focus on the positive and growing from it. I'm very young, and I still have much to learn, but I'm sure of a few things. 1, that the sun will rise tomorrow morning and I will probably still be horrible at math. And 2, courage is all you'll ever need if you think you have nothing at all. It can't be taken away from you. It's yours. It's yours. I want everyone to take a deep breath and close their eyes. Close your eyes. Become one with yourself. Think about what scares you. Visualize it. Think about the things you think you cannot do or what you have not tried. Think of your mistakes. Think of your disappointments. Sit with yourself. Know your struggles. Accept them. We are the designers of our own catastrophe. Now, rid yourself of that negativity. You don't need it anymore. Think of how strong you are and how much you've overcome with courage. Think of where you would be had you not taken a leap of faith and a dose of courage. Smile. Be proud of that strength. We're also the designers of our own triumphs. Maya Angelou put it best when she said, "You may encounter defeats, but you must not be defeated." Understand hard times do arrive, but courage allows those times to be overcome. It doesn't matter who you used to be. What matters is who you decide to be today, in this very moment. You are not your mistakes. You are not your mishaps. You are not your past. You are not your wounds. You can decide differently today and at every single moment. Remember that. You are offered a new opportunity with each breath you take to think, choose, decide, and act differently in a way that supports you in being all that you are capable of being. You are not less than. You are enough. And with courage, you are unstoppable. Thank you.
Before we leave, I'd just like to say a couple thank yous. The first to Mr. Grant for doing our video in the back and filming these. So thank you, Mr. Grant. A second thank you to our panel of judges, Ms. Shaniel, Mr. Baker, Ms. Perkins, and Mr. Waters for their time and their effort tonight. I'd like to thank our audience for doing a great job and to remind you that you have a chance to have a voice in this tonight. That survey will open sometime during study hours, probably around 8:30. Please take the time to give your feedback. It's important. It's something that we'll listen to. And finally, and obviously most importantly, thank you to our speakers tonight. You know, I think you heard that there was a theme about courage, and it takes a lot of bravery to stand up on a night like this in front of your classmates, in front of your peers, in front of the people you go to school with, and to deliver a speech. And they certainly were wonderful tonight. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you, and have a wonderful night.